The sun was bleeding gold over the plains when the stagecoach rattled into Hollow Creek, its wheels throwing up the same tired dust that had swallowed this town for years. The people here didn't rush for much, but they always came out when the coach arrived, not because they expected news, but because it broke the monotony of another endless day. From the porch of the saloon, Sheriff Carson leaned back in his chair, squinting at the horizon. Beside him, the stranger they'd started calling the quiet cowboy stood with one hand resting on his belt, hat tipped low, a man built of silence and weather. His name was Luke Kerrigan, and though he had been in Hollow Creek for 3 weeks, no one could say much about him. He came with a worn horse, a clean gun, and the kind of calm that only men who've survived storms carry. When the stagecoach halted, a small crowd gathered. A few women in sun-faded dresses, some ranch hands, a couple of children with bare feet. Out stepped the usual passengers, a merchant, a preacher's wife, and then a girl. She was slight, no older than 20, carrying a small carpet bag and wearing a bonnet that seemed too big for her face. Her dress was plain, her shoes scuffed, and when she lifted her head, the light caught shy eyes the color of morning rain. People looked at her, then away, whispering quietly. Hollow Creek had seen its share of women, but few that looked like this one, uncertain, fragile, almost lost. Luke watched her without meaning to. Something about her stillness, the way she held her bag close as if it were armor, drew his attention more than all the noise of the street. The sheriff called out, "Need help finding someone, miss?" She shook her head, voice barely audible. "No, sir. I'll manage." Later, Luke found her again, in front of the general store, struggling to lift a sack of flour. He walked over, his boots crunching the dust, and without a word, took the sack from her hands and placed it gently on the wagon beside her. "Thank you," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. He tipped his hat slightly. "You're new in town," she nodded. "Came to work for Mrs. Tully at the boarding house." Then, after a pause, almost defensively, she added, "I know I'm not much to look at, but I work hard." Luke blinked, caught off guard by her words. "Didn't say anything about looks," he said simply. "Just figured. You might need a hand." Her lips curved into something almost like a smile, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. Over the next few days, Hollow Creek went back to its rhythm. Horses, sweat, dust, and silence. Luke spent his mornings mending fences for the ranchers, who'd begun to trust his quiet efficiency. The girl, her name was Clara Mayfield, worked long hours at the boarding house. Luke saw her sometimes sweeping the porch, serving meals always with her head slightly bowed, avoiding the eyes of men who stared too long. Rumors started, as they always did. Some said she was running from something. Maybe a man, maybe a past she couldn't bear to speak of. But Luke never asked. He just watched. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills and the town bathed in orange haze, Luke found Clara sitting alone behind the boarding house. Her hands were in her lap, her dress stained from work, and her eyes followed the drifting dust in the air. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle her. "You okay?" he asked softly. She jumped slightly, then nodded. "Yes, sir. Just tired." Luke leaned against the wooden fence. "You don't have to call me sir," he said with a faint smile. "Luke's fine." She hesitated, glancing up at him. "You don't talk much, do you?" He shrugged. "Don't have much worth saying most days." There was a silence, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things neither of them dared to speak. Then she whispered almost to herself, "I heard folks talking. About me, they say I'm plain. They say no man would look twice." Luke turned his head slowly, his gaze steady on her face. "You believe that?" She bit her lip, her voice trembling. "I ain't like the women in the magazines or the posters. I don't have the kind of beauty that makes men stop walking." He studied her for a long moment, the honesty in her posture, the sadness tucked behind her words. Then he said quietly, "Maybe that's why I noticed you." Her brows furrowed. "Why?" He looked away, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Because I don't need fancy. I've seen fancy and it never lasts. Paint washes off, dresses tear, but honesty, one that stays. You've got that. And that's rare." For a moment, neither of them moved. The sound of the wind whispered between the boards of the fence, carrying the smell of hay and dust. Clara blinked rapidly, fighting something that felt like disbelief, or maybe hope. No one had ever said something like that to her before. "I'm not pretty," she whispered again, almost testing him. Luke turned fully to face her. His eyes steady, voice calm but sure. "That's fine," he said. "I need honest, not fancy." The words hung there, simple but strong, like a quiet promise in the cooling air. Clara didn't know what to say. All she could do was look at him. This man who didn't smile much, didn't talk much, but saw her in a way no one ever had. When Luke finally walked away, she sat there long after the sun had gone, her heart oddly light, her thoughts circling that one sentence. Maybe it was foolish to believe in such things. Maybe tomorrow he'd ride away, and she'd never hear his voice again. But that night, for the first time since she could remember, Clara Mayfield felt something more than invisible. She felt seen. The morning after their quiet conversation, the town of Hollow Creek woke to a sky painted silver and pale gold. The air smelled of rain, though the clouds still held their burden. Clara stood on the porch of the boarding house, watching the street come alive, the blacksmith stoking his forge, Mrs. Tully yelling at her hens, and the usual shuffle of men heading toward the saloon before noon. But her eyes searched for only one figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing that brown leather vest that looked as though it had weathered 100 storms. Luke. She told herself she wasn't waiting for him, that she only wanted to thank him again. But deep down she knew better. He came riding down the main road just as the wind began to stir. His horse, a dark bay with a white blaze, moved with slow, deliberate strength. Luke tipped his hat when he saw her. "Morning, Miss Mayfield." "Morning, Mr. Kerrigan," she said softly. He dismounted, tying his reins to the post. "Luke," he corrected gently. She smiled faintly. "Luke." He nodded toward the parcel she was holding. "Heading somewhere?" "Mrs. Tully asked me to take this to the tailor's," she said. "She's fixing some curtains." "I'll walk with you," he said almost casually. They moved down the street together, the air thick with the smell of rain and horse sweat. Clara noticed how people's eyes followed them, whispers rising like low wind. She'd grown used to stares, but this time they didn't sting as much. Maybe it was because Luke didn't seem to notice them at all. They reached the tailor's shop, a little wooden building with faded blue paint. As Clara handed over the package, thunder rumbled in the distance. Luke glanced toward the clouds. "Rain's coming hard. You best stay inside a while." Clara hesitated. "Mrs. Tully will fuss if I don't hurry back." "She'll fuss more if you're soaked to the bone," he said. So she stayed. They sat by the window, watching the first drops splash against the glass. For a long time, neither spoke, content to listen to the rhythm of the storm. Then Clara asked quietly, "Why did you come to Hollow Creek, Luke?" He shifted, gaze on the rain. "Looking for quiet." "A man gets tired of running from noise that won't quit." "What kind of noise?" "The kind that lives inside your head." Clara looked down, understanding more than she said. "You've lost people." He nodded once. "Wife, long time ago. She liked fancy things, city dances, silk dresses. I tried to give her that life. But a man like me don't belong in parlors and chandeliers. She left when she realized that." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Don't be," he said softly. "She wanted different skies. I can't fault her for it." They fell silent again. Outside, the rain became a downpour, drumming on the roof like a heartbeat. Clara found herself watching his hands, and scarred, steady, strong. The kind of hands that worked, that built, that didn't lie. "You don't seem the type to stay in one place long," she said. "I'm not," he admitted. "But maybe I'm tired of leaving." He turned toward her then, and the look in his eyes made her chest tighten. "You ever think about staying, Clara? Somewhere that don't need you to be anyone but yourself?" She hesitated, her throat tightening. "I've never had that choice. I worked in a sewing shop when I was 13, then at a diner in Wichita. Folks only ever saw what they wanted, a quiet girl who didn't shine. Shining ain't always worth the burn," he said quietly. The storm raged for an hour before easing into a soft drizzle. Luke helped her up, and they walked back through the damp street. The air was fresh, the dirt dark and wet under their boots. For the first time, Clara found herself laughing when her skirt caught a puddle. Luke looked at her and smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that made her heart skip by the time they reached the boarding house. The clouds were parting, and a faint rainbow bent low over the hills. Luke stopped at the steps. "You'll be all right here?" She nodded. "Yes," he lingered a moment, then said, "If you ever need something, anything, you come find me at the blacksmith's barn. I'm helping there this week." She thanked him and watched as he walked away, his figure growing smaller against the horizon. Something had shifted between them, something fragile but real. That night, Mrs. Tully found Clara sitting by the window, staring out at the stars. "That cowboy's got a good heart," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Careful, child. Men like that don't stay long." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but he speaks truth. That's worth something." The days that followed were filled with quiet exchanges, a shared glance at the market, a nod across the street, a short walk by the river when dusk turned the water bronze. Luke never made grand promises. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than most men's vows. Then one morning, everything changed. A rider came through town bringing word that a gang was headed east, robbing stagecoaches and ranches. Luke saddled his horse before dawn. Clara found him tightening his saddle straps, the light barely touching the horizon. "You're leaving," she said softly. He looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Just for a bit. Sheriff asked for help. I owe him that much." Clara swallowed hard. "And if you don't come back?" He stepped closer, resting a rough hand gently against her cheek. "Then remember what I said. Fancy fades, Clara. But honesty, that's what keeps a soul steady. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "You made me see myself different." "Luke, no one ever did that." He gave her one last smile, small but real. "Then I reckon my time here meant something." He rode out before the sun had fully risen, his figure disappearing into the horizon. Clara stood there long after he was gone, clutching the memory of his words like a prayer. Weeks later, when word came that the gang had been stopped and that Luke Kerrigan was alive, unwounded but alive, she wept. Not from fear, but from relief. Because somewhere out there, the man who chose honesty over fancy still carried her heart with him, and maybe one day, when the dust settled and the skies were clear again, he'd ride back down that same road, and this time he'd stay. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps more stories like Luke and Clara's come to life. Tales of love, courage, and finding beauty in the honest hearts of ordinary souls. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.